The White House press room hummed with restless energy. Reporters adjusted camera lenses, shuffled papers, and traded quiet predictions about the briefing ahead. To them, it was just another routine day, another appearance, another cycle of questions and headlines. Then the double doors opened. President Donald Trump stepped inside. But this time, he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was Barron Trump, tall, composed, and carrying a quiet presence that instantly shifted the mood of the room. Conversations faded mid-sentence. Barron rarely appeared in public, and almost never in an official setting like this. Curiosity replaced routine. Something unexpected was unfolding. Father and son approached the podium together. Cameras began clicking rapidly, the sharp bursts echoing to the sudden silence. The president cleared his throat, preparing to speak. Before he could begin, Barron gently placed a hand on the podium, as if grounding himself. The small gesture drew even more attention. President Trump finally spoke, his tone unusually calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, today isn't about politics," he said. "It's about something more important, family, responsibility, and what it means to listen." Reporters exchanged puzzled glances. This wasn't the fiery rhetoric they anticipated. Pens hovered above notebooks as uncertainty filled the room. Barron stood quietly beside him, hands folded, steady and thoughtful. Earlier that morning, Trump had told his son, "Sometimes the hardest thing is walking into a room where people expect answers you don't have." Barron had simply replied, "Then I'll stand with you." Now that promise stood before the world. "As parents," the president continued, "we sometimes forget our children are always watching. They see not only our successes, but our mistakes. Today, I wanted Barron here, not as a symbol, but as my son." A ripple of surprise moved through the press corps. This felt personal, not strategic. In the back row, a young reporter named Daniel Rivers adjusted his pen nervously. New to the press corps, he lacked the practiced cynicism of the veterans around him. Something about this moment felt fragile, important in a way headlines rarely captured. Trump paused mid-sentence and glanced at his son. For a brief instant, he seemed unsure, almost vulnerable. Then he stepped aside and gestured toward the microphone. The room gasped. Barron Trump speaking publicly was nearly unheard of. Slowly, Barron leaned forward. His voice, deeper than many expected, carried calmly across the room. "I've watched my dad answer questions every day," he said. "Some fair, some not. But I've learned people don't just want answers. They want honesty." He paused and added, "Today I want to ask something too, not to the reporters, but to my dad." The room froze. Trump raised an eyebrow but nodded. Barron turned toward him. "When everything ends one day, politics, power, the cameras, what do you want to remember most about you?" The question landed like a bell, ringing through silence. Pens stopped moving. Even cameras seemed hesitant to interrupt the moment. For once, the president had no immediate reply. He looked at his son, then at the crowd, and finally exhaled, "That I love my family more than anything else." The words lingered, heavier than any policy statement. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He knew instinctively this was a kind of truth no headline could fully hold. Barron gave a small nod, satisfied, and stepped back. A softness appeared in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. The press secretary signaled for questions. Chaos returned instantly. "Mr. President, what about the election? Barron, are you planning?" Voices overlapped, urgency replacing reflection. But Daniel remained still. He wasn't thinking about politics. He was thinking about his own father, who had passed away a year earlier. Too many conversations left unfinished. Too many questions never asked. Regret had followed him ever since. When the noise finally settled, Daniel raised his hand. His voice, when called upon, was steady. "Mr. President, Barron, may I ask something not about politics, but about life?" The room quieted again. Trump studied him with curiosity. Barron tilted his head, slightly listening. Daniel took a breath. "You spoke about family and what matters when all this fades away. How do you balance the demands of power with being present as a father? And Barron, how does it feel to share your dad with the world?" A hush fell over the room. Some reporters shifted uneasily. The question felt deeply personal, almost forbidden. Trump considered his answer carefully. "It isn't easy," he admitted. "I've missed moments. I know that, but being honest about those mistakes matters. My son has taught me that more than anyone." Then Barron leaned toward the microphone again. "It's hard," he said simply, "but being here today means more than people realize. I'm not here as a symbol. I'm here as a son." The sincerity in his voice cut through the room more powerfully than any speech. Daniel swallowed, emotion rising unexpectedly. Hearing those words felt like receiving something he had lost, a form of closure he never thought possible. Whispers spread among reporters. The story had shifted. It was no longer about strategy or controversy, but something quieter and more human. For once, the president didn't try to reclaim the spotlight. He allowed the moment and his son's words to stand on their own. And standing in the back row, Daniel felt his heart change, realizing that sometimes the most important questions aren't asked to shape the news, but to heal the person asking them. Daniel felt his heart racing. He hadn't asked this question out of ambition or a desire for recognition, only sincerity, yet he could feel the ripple it created across the room. The usual edge among reporters softened. Even the most aggressive journalists seemed reluctant to shatter the fragile atmosphere that had settled over the briefing. A veteran reporter seated beside him leaned closer and whispered, "Kid, that's the only real question asked in this room today." Daniel didn't respond. He simply listened. Barron adjusted the microphone again, his composure steady. "The truth is," he said, "being the son of someone in power means people think they know you, but they don't. They don't see the dinners, the small conversations, the quiet moments. I just want people to understand that behind all of this, he's still my dad." A murmur moved gently through the room. Even reporters who strongly disagreed with the president felt the sincerity in those words. Politics faded for a moment, replaced by something universally understood. Daniel blinked away unexpected emotion and wrote a single word in his notebook. Not for publication, but for himself. "Listen." The president looked at his son differently now, not as a teenager standing beside him for appearance's sake, but as someone brave enough to speak truths many adults avoided. He cleared his throat, almost cautiously. "Barron reminded me this morning that honesty matters more than approval," Trump said. "That's not something you expect your child to teach you, but it's true. I haven't always been perfect. Today, I wanted to show him, and all of you, that family isn't a weakness. It's a strength." Reporters hurried to capture the quote, yet the emotion behind it mattered more than the words themselves. The president wasn't debating or defending. He was opening a door rarely seen in public. Daniel felt a quiet ache rise within him. He remembered his own father, a factory worker who came home exhausted each night, but never forgot to bring a small chocolate bar from the corner store. They rarely spoke about feelings, yet now Daniel understood those gestures had been his father's way of saying, "I see you. I care." Barron briefly placed a hand on his father's arm. The gesture was simple, almost unnoticed, but it carried a depth no camera could fully capture. Respect. Daniel realized then that this wasn't merely a press conference. It was a reminder of how fragile and powerful family bonds could be, even beneath the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Normally, by this point, reporters would be shouting over one another, competing for headlines. But today felt different. The room had grown reverent. Some journalists even lowered their cameras, as if embarrassed to intrude upon something deeply personal. The president noticed a shift. "For years," he said, scanning the room, "I've stood here answering questions about the world. But sometimes the most important questions come from right here." He gestured toward Barron. "And those are the hardest ones to answer." Daniel's chest tightened. His mind drifted to a hospital room, the last conversation he'd had with his father. He had been too afraid to ask what truly mattered. Too careful. Too late. Watching this exchange now, grief and healing intertwined inside him. A senior reporter raised her hand and, surprisingly, spoke gently. "Barron, what have you learned from your father?" The room waited. Barron thought for a long moment before answering. That no matter what people say about you, good or bad, you have to decide who you are and stay true to it. The room seemed to exhale collectively. The wisdom was simple yet profound. Daniel scribbled quickly, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere. He heard his father's voice in memory. "Son, people will say many things about you. Some true, some not. But if you forget who you are, you lose more than any insult can take away." The similarity struck him deeply. His throat tightened. It felt as though a message he once ignored had returned to him, spoken now through the son of a president. He blinked back tears, hiding behind his notebook. He wasn't just covering a story anymore. He was facing unfinished pieces of his own life. Suddenly, the president pointed toward the back of the room. "You," he said. "What's your name?" Daniel froze. "Daniel Rivers, sir." Trump nodded thoughtfully. "You asked a question that mattered today. Don't lose that." Cameras flashed instantly. It was rare for the president to single out a young reporter. Daniel felt both startled and humbled. He hadn't sought attention, yet somehow the moment had found him. And for the first time in a long while, the memory of his father felt less like a wound and more like guidance. Though the focus remained on father and son, whispers began spreading about Melania's absence. Before speculation could grow, Barron leaned toward the microphone again. "My mom couldn't be here today," he said calmly, "but she's the one who reminds me that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, and I carry that with me." The statement silenced curiosity before it could turn into gossip. The president smiled faintly. "He's right. Strength isn't about volume. Sometimes it's about presence, even when the cameras aren't watching." Daniel admired how naturally Barron handled the moment. No defensiveness, no evasion, just honesty. It made him think of his own mother, how she had held the family together after his father's death without ever seeking recognition. Her quiet resilience had kept him moving forward when everything else felt uncertain. And as Daniel stood there, pen trembling slightly in his hand, he realized he wasn't only witnessing a story unfold. He was learning how to understand his own. Daniel made a quiet promise to himself that night. He would call his mother, not out of obligation, but gratitude, to thank her for the strength she had given all these years without ever asking for recognition or applause. For the first time in his career, he understood that the story unfolding before him was not truly about politics. It was about something universal, the invisible threads that hold families together even when words fail. A reporter finally broke the softened atmosphere. "Mr. President," she asked sharply, "are you admitting to regrets?" The room tensed, expecting resistance. But Trump didn't react offensively. Instead, he exhaled slowly. "Yes," he said, "I regret moments when I wasn't there. I regret times I let the noise of the world drown out what mattered most. But regrets can teach us, if we're willing to listen." There was no performance in his voice, no calculation. It was not a politician speaking. It was a father. Barron glanced at him, clearly surprised. Public admissions of regret were rare from his father. Daniel's pen hovered above his notebook as his thoughts drifted elsewhere, to the last voicemail his father had left, still saved on his phone. "I know I wasn't always there, son, but I'm proud of you." Daniel had never answered. He hadn't known how. Until now, he swallowed hard, realizing this moment wasn't only about the president and his son. It was about every father and every child navigating silence, pride, and unspoken love. Barron leaned toward the microphone again. "Dad, can I ask another question?" Trump smiled faintly. "Go ahead." Barron hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Do you think being present made you a better dad or a worse one?" A collective gasp moved through the room. The question was raw, fearless, impossible to prepare for. Trump paused, visibly affected. "Both," he admitted quietly. "It made me absent sometimes. But it also made me realize how much being your dad matters to me, more than any title ever could." Daniel's vision blurred. Tears gathered despite his effort to remain composed. It was the question he had always wanted to ask his own father, but never had the courage or time to voice. Around him, reporters slowly lowered their pens. The transformation was undeniable. This was no longer a press briefing. It was a father and son confronting truth together while the world watched. The room's energy shifted from formality to intimacy. Even the constant hum of cameras felt subdued, as though the machines themselves sensed the gravity of the moment. Trump's voice softened further. "At the end of the day, Barron, if you remember me as a good father, then I've succeeded, no matter what the polls say." Barron nodded quietly. Relief flickered across his face. The kind of relief every child longs to feel but rarely witnesses so openly. Daniel's hand trembled as he wrote. He wasn't sure this counted as journalism anymore. It felt closer to collective therapy, shared under bright lights. In his mind, he whispered words meant for someone no longer there. I remember you. I'm proud of you, too. The press secretary shifted uneasily, unsure whether to intervene, but no one interrupted. The silence had become sacred. Rival journalists no longer competed. For once, politics had laid down its armor. Daniel realized something profound. The most powerful stories were never about power itself. They were about the fragile truths that connect people across differences. Trump looked out at the room. Every one of you has someone waiting at home, he said. Don't miss the chance to tell them what matters. You never know when it might be too late. The words struck Daniel deeply. He thought again of the voicemail, untouched for months. Tonight, he would listen to it again, not with regret, but with gratitude. As the press secretary prepared to end the session, Trump raised his hand. One more question. From Daniel. Daniel froze as cameras turned toward him. His heart pounded loudly in his ears. Slowly, he stood. Mr. President. Barron, he began, voice unsteady but sincere. Thank you for sharing today. My father passed away last year, and I never asked him the questions Barron asked you. I regret that. But today reminded me that maybe it's not too late to honor him through how I live. The room fell completely silent. Reporters weren't meant to become part of the story, yet no one objected. The honesty transcended protocol. Trump nodded solemnly. Then you've already honored him, son, by asking. Barron gave Daniel a small, understanding glance. It was brief but meaningful. For Daniel, it felt like healing. As the conference ended, no one rushed out. People lingered, reluctant to disturb the atmosphere that had formed. Daniel packed his notebook slowly, already knowing his article wouldn't focus on policy or controversy. It would tell the story of a moment when a father and son reminded a divided room what truly mattered. Other reporters looked at him differently now, not with rivalry, but respect. Near the exit, Barron whispered something to his father, drawing a faint smile. The words remained private, yet their meaning was clear. Bridges had been built, not between parties, but between hearts. Before leaving, Trump paused at the doorway and looked back. His eyes found Daniel. Thank you for your question, he said. It wasn't easy, but it was right. The acknowledgement sent murmurs through the room. Presidents rarely thanked reporters. Daniel bowed his head slightly. It didn't feel like success. It felt like peace. Barron offered one final nod, a silent understanding shared between two sons who had both learned something about their fathers that day. That night, Daniel sat at his desk, a blank page glowing on his laptop screen. He typed the headline. In the press room, a father and son reminded us what matters. He wrote not about politics, but about humanity, a father admitting regret, a son asking brave questions, and a reminder to cherish family before time runs out. When he finished, tears filled his eyes. For once, the story wasn't only for readers. It was for his father. By morning, the article had gone viral. Readers responded not with political debate, but with personal stories, calls made to parents after years of silence, forgiveness offered, relationships renewed. The press conference sparked something no campaign could manufacture. Reflection. Messages flooded Daniel's inbox. One stood above the rest. From his mother, your father would be proud. So am I. Daniel wept. Weeks later, the memory of that day still guided him. He continued writing, but with a new compass. He no longer chased headlines. He chased truth. One quiet evening, he replayed his father's voicemail one last time. When it ended, he whispered into the stillness, I'm proud of you too, Dad. And at last, the weight he had carried began to lift. The press conference had changed more than how the world viewed a president and his son. It had changed Daniel, and perhaps in gentle ripples, it had changed countless others, reminding them that life's most important questions are never about power. They are about love. And so the story ended not with politics, but with a simple truth. When we dare to ask and answer with honesty, We build bridges that outlast even the loudest headlines.